Men who have sold/donated sperm and gave permission for the child to contact you at 18, what is your story? So, I'm not the dad, but a kid. So my bio dad donated sperm and gave permission to be identified. Didn't even have to be after 18. In counting, because we're not sure if we've found all of us yet, there are 53 half-siblings, all his kids. My full sister and I didn't know we were donor babies until I was a freshman in college, and her a junior in high school. It was a few more years before we found out the scope of our family. As such, I never got to meet the man as he passed away in 2018, but I've been getting to know my half-siblings and I'm sad to have missed him. He apparently engaged in annual reunions and was interested in getting to know all of the kids if they, and their families, were open to it. We all support each other basically by default even though we didn't grow up together. What's even wilder about him is that he got national news coverage for something besides his giant flock of kids. The guy got married to a woman the day he met her as a competition to be his bride in the Mall of America. It was apparently a heartfelt story and the two of them had a 20-something year marriage with 4 kids that they raised themselves. The Mall of America even has a plaque with his name on it now, so you can go find him if you really try. The man was a weirdo, but in the best way. He was kind and generous with his time and really seemed to care about all of his kids, or at least the ones he knew about. Oh hey, I can answer this. I'm not a donor, but I was donor conceived, along with my sister, same donor. I had a great dad and never had any desire to find out who my donor was, but I was always curious about siblings, especially when I learned there's no legal limit on how many children you can father when you donate sperm in the US. Well, 123 ANDME test later, and the first result on the top of the list is a half-sister in Texas. We get in contact, realize we have a ton in common, and it sparked a fire in her to find more siblings. She took an ancestry DNA test and the top of that list was a man in California, listed as father. She got in touch with him right away, turns out he's a fantastic guy. He was adopted himself and also got in contact with his birth mom as an adult, so he had been on our side of the situation and was very open and willing to talk. His wife has been super supportive of us meeting too. He has 3, organically made kids of his own. I was especially ecstatic to learn that I'm a big sister, plus we've since found 3 more half-siblings who've all been very cool and excited to find each other. At this point, I've met all but one of them in person, and I got to meet my biological grandmother too. TLDR, I went from having a dad and 1 sibling to having 2 dads and 8 siblings over the span of a couple of years. It's been pretty cool. Smiley face. My younger bro donated multiple times unbeknownst to me. Years later my wife and I did Ancestry.com to get an idea of how diverse our backgrounds were and wham. Started getting contacted by lots of people, over a dozen, saying we were close relatives. At first I was confused and asked the early ones about their parentage, they all had a similar stories. Single mom went to a sperm bank. Didn't take long to guess what happened. Call my brothers and asked. Younger one fessed up and said yes, he went multiple times. In fact they told him he had to stop donating because there was a statistical probability his progeny could meet and date, at least they seemed ethical. I asked if it was okay if I gave them his contact, he was fine with it. The weird thing is that they all had his face, like one look at them and it was obvious who their father was. Anyway, this went on for a couple of years and they all connected with each other. Seems there is over 20 now, probably more. He has met a couple of them but it was all casual. The whole thing is super weird to the rest of family to have all these close relatives who somehow are part of the family but then again not really. It is incredible how the similarities are passed down. My father-in-law had a daughter that was the result of a one-night stand and was adopted by a wonderful family. The adoption agency had a registration of birth parents and kids, who could each, blind to the other, give permission to be contacted, and only if both parties did, they'd put them in contact. So this happens in her early 20s, and they make arrangements for her to fly to meet her birth family, including my wife and her brother, her half-siblings. My wife goes to pick her up at the airport since the parents live out of town. There were no arrangements, no pictures, nothing, this was pre-Facebook, my wife saw her come out the doors, knew without question it was her, and she knew the same, they had a huge tearful hug without even any words. They just knew, by looks, by mannerisms, whatever. The incredible thing is, I've shown pictures of the half-sister, with or without her birth father and half-sister, and everyone agrees she doesn't actually look much like them. But there's something about the looks and how they act that is so similar between all of them, it really is incredible. Edit, one more detail. We found out years later that the father and daughter contacted the agency to open themselves up to contact, within 24 hours of each other. A complete coincidence. The agency actually didn't do it for a couple weeks because they were trying to contact the daughter's adoptive parents, who had passed away, hence the delay, because they just assumed there had been contact since they were in touch so impossibly close together. Somewhat related, but I've got a brother from another mother and have a happy story to share. My dad had a kid with a lady in the 80s, she didn't want to keep it and he didn't want to be a single dad, so he was put up for adoption and they split up and go about their days. There's likely a lot more to the story, but I've only ever been told my dad's side, so I'll leave it at that. Fast forward 30 years, my dad has settled down and now has a family of 5 kids with my mom. He gets a call from a nonprofit asking if he'd provide his information if his kid wants to reach out. He does, and goes about his day. Fast forward a few months, he gets a call from his son, initially wanting to learn about possible health causes and curiosity. He ended up getting adopted by an amazing family and's doing very well for himself. He wants to come to town and meet my dad. Dad has 5 awkward conversations his kids explaining we had another brother and he was coming up to visit. Note, a running insult when we were growing up was calling each other adopted, which pissed Dad off a lot, lol. Fast forward 2 weeks, there was a graduation this weekend and we're having all the family over, so was a good time for him to come up and meet the guy. Great person, hit it off and still are close with all the brothers. Everything worked out pretty good all things considered. He's a spitting image of Dad and really great friend. His parents are amazing people as well. Really lucky to have him in my life. Man, as someone who is adopted and knows his birth father has a family with 3 sons younger than me, there's nothing more I want than for something similar like this to happen. That being said, I'm aware that I was a mistake made by a couple young kids and I respect their courage to go through with the birth and find me an incredible home. I've done some reaching out and through third-party sources, I've learned that I am most likely a secret that has never been shared. They're all from an incredibly small town. I've seen pictures of my brothers and I looked exactly like each of them during those stages of life. It's mind-blowing to me to know I have blood relations somewhere out there. All this being said, I respect their privacy and their decision. I have no intention of causing turmoil or stress. Part of me has just always wanted to know more about the families I actually came from. P.S. I was raised by 2 incredible parents that have shown selflessness I can't fathom for someone/thing they didn't even conceive. I wasn't adopted into a financially rich family, but I have an incredible wealth of moral grounding and have been taught that empathy and compassion are the 2 greatest strengths someone can have. I love my parents, curiosity has just always gets the best of me. My mom divorced my father when I was 3 and then moved 400 kilometers away, severing contact with him and his side of the family, including my uncle, his brother, and aunt/godmother. I hadn't seen my uncle and aunt for 12 years when they started reaching out to us tentatively to reconnect, and the first thing my aunt told me was that I tilt my head and stare just like my father. I have the mother of all resting bitch faces, as people love to tell me. That was very weird to hear, as I've had 0 contact, in any shape or form, with my father since I was basically a toddler. A couple of years later, I randomly bought a CD from a musician I'd never heard before, Ludwig Hirsch. To give some context, Hirsch is Austrian. I live in Rhineland-Palatinate. Hirsch made Austropop-style music in German. I was full goth and abhorred German music at that time. Hirsch would be considered niche music for a tween in the 90s. I have no idea why I picked up that CD. When I played it at home, my mom nearly had a crying fit. Hirsch was my father's favorite musician. I find it extremely unsettling how much I inherited from my father without any direct parental influence beyond whatever happened in those 3 first years of my life. He was an abusive alcoholic with a serious temper problem who beat my mom half to death. It's one of the reasons why I can count the number of times I've consumed alcohol in my 42 years on the fingers of one hand. I do not want to even risk falling down that hole. Mine may seem awkward. My mom's friends are lesbian. 10 years ago all 3 came to me and asked if I would donate. Why the hell not? Lovely people and desperate to be parents. After the second turkey baster insemination, they got pregnant. They have a beautiful little girl. I went on to have my own 2 daughters and they then came to me 2 years ago and asked again. This time, it was a bigger decision, but my partner knew the full story and was more than happy to allow us to try a second time, which was again successful. They had a boy this time. We've spoke extensively and we all have no issue with them knowing I'm the donor. My kids will also know when the time comes. We agreed that we would run off the whole I have no input other than biological. Obviously we won't be able to stop the whole who's my father, but we have agreed that when the time does come, they will be sat down with my own 2 children as well, and they explained that the situation of I'm not a father to them and that it was purely to allow them to have children and that they aren't missing out by having 2 mums rather than a mum and dad. It's hard to type out, but I'm sure you guys will get it. Thankfully, they look nothing like my own children. That could be awkward considering we live in the same neighborhood. Also, I have no attachment or need to be anything to these children. May seem horrible to say, but this was my gift to 2 amazing parents and they are doing fantastic. I don't need to be there for them. Edit, Thanks for all the kind words, but really, I'm just helping two people live the best life they can. I'm a simple man. If I can help someone, I will. Life's difficult as it is. People do good things to help me, I do the same for others. We should all be helping each other where we can, no matter how big or small the gesture. Bumped into a high school acquaintance when Pride Week was going on. She was in town with her wife for it, and I lived in the area. We're from a small town, so it was nice to see a friendly face, and we were chit-chatting. A few weeks later they asked if I could donate. I was on a free spirit sabbatical at the time, so I figured why not. I never wanted to raise children of my own and they liked my genetics. We went through a clinic and after 2 tries she got pregnant and had twins. I've only seen pictures of the children so far. I think the weirdest part afterwards was them asking if I'd be willing to donate to other friends of theirs. Apparently there's like an entire database of lesbian couples looking for donors, and my email account was flooded with requests. It's what I imagine being a pretty girl on a dating app is like. I was bombarded. Without sounding arrogant, I'm 6 feet 4 inches, naturally thin, blue eyes, blonde hair, graduate level education, and I don't wear glasses. A lot of inquiries. It was too much, and the few people I reached out to were very pushy and requesting things like I come fly to their house in Washington to do home insemination because they didn't want to pay for a clinic, or some requesting I meet up and hook up with them and they'd tell their kid it was some dude they met on vacation, or even some requesting I stick around to act as a CO parent / cool uncle. I haven't donated since, and I think the satisfaction of 2 offspring is enough for me now. I started donating almost exactly 10 years when I was living on the West Coast. I had only been exposed to the concept of sperm donating through movies when one would do it for gas money on road trips or when you were in dire need for fast cash. It wasn't like that at all. It took over a month and many unpaid donations to even qualify to become a donor. They did a very thorough screening process to make sure your sperm very viable and would survive the freezing process. Then they tested it to make sure you weren't a carrier of potential known diseases that could be passed down. After all of that, I started donating 2 to 3 times a week for a few months until I ended up moving across the country to go to grad school. I said I was open to being contacted once they were 18 and was excited about that prospect when I would be in my 40s. One day I randomly logged onto Facebook and checked my messages. I had a message request from a random person in Australia which just seemed like spam. I'm a citizen of the USA but was living in Germany at the time. Instead of immediately deleting the message, I read it and a lady explained that curiosity got the better of her and she tried to find the donor of her 2 kids. She used the little information that she knew about the donor and slowly linked the info to me. I even had TBT photos on my profile that looked like her kids. It was a match. I wasn't upset, but rather excited as I now knew more information about who and how I had helped. That was 2 years ago, and now we communicate a couple times every year to update each other about what had happened in our lives. It's really exciting to see the growth of the 2 offspring that I helped produce. They're both under 10 and they know who I am, so they'll be able to grow into the understanding of our different than normal relationship. The clinic told me that I had birthed 7 children in total, so 5 are still unknown to me at this time. Overall, it has been a good process and I'm really happy that I took part in it. Would do it again, and I still get emails from the clinic telling me that if I'm ever back in the area to consider becoming a donor again. Okay, so this story doesn't completely fit, but this might be a good place to share it. I always knew that my mom had fertility issues and did IVF in order to have me, but I didn't know I was a sperm donor baby until about 3 years ago. It was a surprise to everyone in my family. Wild to not know for that long, but it gets even wilder. I've always been interested in genealogy and got an ancestry DNA kit from a relative for my birthday a little over 3 years ago. I was excited to finally get my results back and start building my family tree. However, when I got the results back, I found that I matched up with a lot of my mom's relatives that had done the test, but none of my dad's. I tried to shrug it off as the technology not being good or specific enough, but I couldn't explain all these individuals who were popping up as a strong match as a half-sibling. Eventually one of them messaged me and informed me that they all had the same father who was a sperm donor and that they were so happy to find another half-sibling. I was a little freaked out but eventually confronted my parents about it and they were completely shocked. My father had supposedly given a sperm sample for the IVF and they had never even considered using a donor. Eventually my mom tracked down some paperwork from the IVF clinic they used and we did some research and found that the clinic closed shortly after my birth after being involved in a few different lawsuits relating to mix-up of IVF samples. At that point they had been closed for over 2 decades, so there wasn't really much we could do. Everyone always commented that I had features that matched my father, so it was never even imagined that this could be possible. My sister and her wife just had a baby girl. My sister-in-law carried the baby, and they asked me to be the donor. I'm a 25-year-old grad student, who hopefully will have kids one day, but wasn't planning on having any right now. I didn't have any strong feelings for yes or no at the beginning. With the new prevalence of incest porn, both actual porn, and in shows like Game of Thrones, I was a little concerned people would feel like it was wrong. Like the child might have to deal with people telling her it's gross, or I would have to deal with it when trying to start my own family. Some Google searching told me that other couples had asked for siblings to be donors and that was enough for me to feel like it was normal. I think there was one, where a couple used a turkey baster to do the insemination. Don't do that, work with a sperm bank. Also, when I went to sperm bank I was jacking off in a cement room sitting on a folding chair. It's a weird experience, but it isn't weird because it's incest. The strongest reason I found for doing it was that the child would look like my sister. We're 6 years apart, but there are photos of us together that people have said we could be twins. Parents should love their children regardless of appearance, but currently oh she looks just like you. Is such a frequent interaction and source of pride. Nearly every other parent gets to enjoy that, my sister should too. Amazingly, the baby looks exactly like my sister. It's even more obvious when comparing the pictures of the baby to pictures of my sister as a baby. It makes my sister really happy, and that makes me happy. I am a known donor for friends of mine, one of which I've known since we were in grade school. Before she came out, we always joked that if we were both single and childless in our 30s we would get married. Flash forward about 20 years and she and her wife approached me at a party and asked if I would be interested in being a known donor for them. I have been with my current so for 12 years and neither of us have any intentions on being parents, so I thought this was an excellent way for me to continue the bloodline as well as give two of my favorite people a child they wanted so badly. I talked it over with my so and we decided to go ahead and do it. We drafted contracts that essentially say that I will have zero responsibility for the child but the child will be fully aware I am the biological father from day one. I live on the coast and they live near Chicago, so logistics were very tough. Planning travel around ovulation schedules, shipping kids back and forth, we tried it all. Finally after a year and a half of trying it finally stuck. The boy turned 1 year old in December. Due to the pandemic I've only been able to see him once as a little baby and once a few weeks ago. I couldn't be happier with the decision. So many people look at me like I'm crazy and always ask how I am handling it. But really, to me it's no different than having a cousin or other close sibling. I subscribe to the belief that the parents are who raised the kid, and they are doing an incredible job so far. We are actually trying for number 2 now with the other mom. Hopefully this try doesn't take as long. Donor conceived child here. I was conceived in the 90s, and at the time non-anonymous donation was not common. I've known I was donor conceived since I was 13 years old. I had always been curious about the donor and any potential siblings, but was too scared to dig deep or do any testing. In 2019, my mom gifted me a 23andMe kit for Christmas and my results matched me with 2 half-siblings. One of them had done a DNA test through another service and connected with the donor's father, who then connected her to the donor, let's call him John. I was also connected with 2 more half-siblings via 23andMe about a month later. John and I started talking through email, and discovered that he grew up literally 30 minutes from me. He is married and has 1 daughter with his wife. They moved out of state a few years ago, but they regularly come back to visit family, and so I've had the opportunity to meet John and his family twice now, along with his wife's 2 sisters and their husbands, who live in the same city. I've also met 2 of my donor-conceived half-siblings. I have an amazing relationship with John and his family. The best way to describe it is somewhere in between family and close family friends. As for my siblings, we video chat about once a month and have a sibs group text. Pre-COVID, we were planning to do a group vacation in the summer to meet each other. We're all vaccinated at this point, and so it's currently on the table for this year. My mom and dad are fully aware of my relationship with everyone in my donor fam, and they both think it's a really neat thing. At one point I worked up the courage to talk to my dad about how he felt, and he didn't seem upset or bothered. I let him know he'd always be my dad and John will always be John. Honestly, I can't imagine a world where things could have gone any better. One of the most interesting things I've found is how much genetics truly play a role in who we are as people. Every single one of us grew up in different households, but yet we all have crossover in interests, personality traits, and quirks that, put together, are too specific to be coincidence. I'm a PI who specializes in forensic genealogy. I donate my time to several adoption groups whose members are looking for their family. There are thousands upon thousands of them. Through this work I discovered that there is enormous demand for sperm donors, so I became what is known as a known donor, meaning that my contact, health, and history information is available to potential recipients to browse in free databases. They decide from there if they want to use me, and we sign a contract, the terms of which include keeping them updated with my contact information in case the child ever wants to contact me. I've had 6 donor children so far, all well under 18, still. I have met 2 of them, but they don't know who I am aside from a friend of their mother's, and likely won't remember me when they're older. A couple of the parents are even friends with each other and have playdates. All of the children's families are on Facebook, and I check up on them every once in a while to see how they're progressing. A couple parents send me updates occasionally. It's a wonderful feeling to help people like this, and my genes benefit as well, so it's not completely altruistic, though I believe it started out from there. I know that some of the children will seek me out when they're older, and I'm looking forward to it. I have 3 of my own who will learn about their half-siblings when they're older, and will probably look forward to meeting them, as well. Edit, I forgot. One of the couples, after the first child, asked if I would donate to the other mother. I did, and she recently gave birth to the first girl of the bunch. Both siblings are blood related but come from a different mother. I thought that was pretty awesome.